I'm WG, and the long-awaited cat lady Rita just released. So, what is she all about? How does she work? What are the cards that you're looking for? How do you build her? With who do you run her? How many dupes do you need? How many, what kind of partner do you need? Everything like that you get answered in one comprehensive video, as well as also chapters on the timeline. Alright, so let's actually start with something we don't usually start with, and that is my pull recommendations in terms of these banners already here. And that is because it just makes sense to talk about the partner. It makes sense to talk about Ivy, because Ivy is about as close as we've gotten to a partner that you can consider potentially skipping. And that is because, let's first familiarize ourselves really quickly with what she does. That is, you get 8% attack and a 25% increase to 2 cost or higher justice attribute cards, but then you can also, after playing 2 cost, 3 cost or 4 cost cards, you can get upwards of a 5% increase. So then you cap out at 8% attack, 40% multiplicative, whereas then the big selling point for the partner would be the new visitor ego skill that allows you to increase the damage that a target takes from 2 cost cards as a final damage multiplier by a further 20%. So that is like the big selling point. Now, contrary to that, that is, what kind of partners do we actually have available? And this one actually comes down to playstyle. So first, let's quickly make it make sense. So Itsuku is pretty much exclusive to Shizuru, Briar doesn't work because we don't have any status or curse cards, and Taya only has an additive buff, which isn't good for a character with a lot of high numbers. So this is more specifically useful for maybe somebody like a Tresor, unless for whatever reason you already have like multiple copies or even level 60. So it's really between Eloise and Ivy. So Ivy, 8% attack, 40% multiplicative, and a good ego skill. Eloise, on the other hand, has a 16% attack, 20% multiplicative, and here comes in the deciding factor. Are you using her exhaust cards, yes or no? Before we go deeper into the builds, there's 3 different builds. You either use Fate Imprints, which are her exhaust cards, or you use her basic attack cards, or you use her time axis collapse, whatever that turns out to be. The name is not as important, but there's 3 distinct playstyles, and one of them features the exhaust cards, which works perfectly well with an Eloise, to a degree even better than what you can expect from the dedicated partner, so long as you don't consider ego skill, whereas the other 2, you would either have to go out of your way to still include Fate Imprints, or just accept the fact that you're not getting the 24% bonus, leaving you with the 16 by 20. But still, regardless of that, outside of all the partners that we have and had, I think Ivy is someone where you could rather save your summons, and even if they decide to buff Ivy in the future, or maybe somebody finds a crazy build that really needs Ivy, which we'll have to see, you can always buy her back for 300 tokens instead of, for example, spending the summons on her. So that's a possibility, right? And then let's quickly talk about Rita, because I've already seen a lot of opinions on her being mid or her being super overpowered. The important part is she is not a must pull. You do not have to go for Rita, but you can absolutely go for her. She will be a good unit, she will treat you well, and even if in the worst case scenario you end up unhappy with her, we already have it confirmed that to the start of every single season we will see improvements or changes to, like, let's say you don't like an Epiphany, or the player base doesn't like an Epiphany, there can be changes to Epiphanies or improvements to her value. So regardless of what it is, looks over matter, right? If you like her, you will be able to make her work, she will shine. It's just currently at the moment, especially also after now 8 hours of testing, she is by no means a must pull, but that doesn't stop her from being a strong character. Alright, now let's quickly understand the basics of how she works and how her entire kit functions. So at the very top here, you see you have two different resources. You have one for the, you could say the clock or the clockwork without the hinges, and then the one with hinges. Those are two separate resource gauges. Now, for her to actually be able to use these resource gauges at all, you need to play out the Chrono Archon card. When you play out the Chrono Archon card, depending on what version you have, you will be able to gain these Chronicles. Now, the Chronicles, let's actually gain ourselves a couple by playing out a card that costs AP, or however you gain the Chronicle. In this case, we spend 1 AP, giving us 1 Chronicle. You see that now on the left side we have 1. When we then also spend the remaining of our AP, you see we go up to 3. And with Future Decreed here, us using another 3 cost card, we will also be able to now go up to 6. 6 is the maximum amount of Chronicles you can have. And also, if you activate a card through an activation effect, it still counts the card's cost towards Chronicle generation. So for example, we paid nothing here, activated a 3 cost card and got 3 Chronicles in exchange. So now that we have these Chronicles, when we end our turn, any remaining Chronicles from the last turn turn into Chronicle Ascension. What you can pretty much think of as Ascension AP. And this Ascension AP, or these Chronicle Ascension stacks, effectively give you a separate AP bar for RITA. So all of RITA's exclusive and basic cards, so all 8 of her cards, will now be able to use this as an extra AP count. So for example here, I can now use this Fate Imprint that usually would cost us 4. Look at our AP is 4. I spend 4. And you see we go down from 6 to 2. And our AP is still untouched. What is important here is that at the beginning of every turn is when you convert from Chronicle to the Chronicle Ascension. Or you can use the Time Paradox card to do the same thing. Take your current Chronicles and turn them into Chronicle Ascension or Ascension AP. So what we then do here is we create ourselves these Fate Imprints. Now what you notice is we play out 1 Fate Imprint. Let's see if it crits. Okay, so look at the top. I know a lot of things just happened, but we used 1 Fate Imprint to play the card, right? We used 1 Fate Imprint to play it for 2. We took 1 of the value at the top. 1 of our AP went away. But in exchange, due to the way our Chrono card works, we gained back 3 Chronicle whenever we consume it. And then because we spent 1 AP on it, we gained an additional 1 Chronicle, right? So once again, here we are in a similar scenario where we're going to spend 3. You see it takes from the top first before it takes from our AP. Now it takes from the top and from our AP, and however much AP we just spent, which is in this case 3, was also added to it. Now, it sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is. It's just something you, I guess, have to get used to playing around with a bit. And now, this is the important part. When you have Chronicles built up, even before ending your turn, you can use Time Paradox to turn Chronicles again into usable AP. So here, we can, even though we were on 0, we can now use this to continue to spend AP, and due to us again being able to use up all our Chronicle Ascensions, we can once again build it back up, bringing us to, in this case, to 6, giving us 6 AP for the next turn. There we go. Alright, now that we're all on the same level of understanding how she works, let's talk about her epiphanies, let's talk about the most desirable versions, and let's talk about what you can do with her. So, Chrono Archon, easily speaking, is just your Chronicle generation, right? How do you get access to this AP? And here there's a couple bigger ones, like this one is generally the best. This is what you generally want to go for, and that is because whenever you get rid of Chronal Ascension by, for example, spending your AP, you already are halfway there towards maxing out your Chronicle, which makes it super easy to be able to get 2 rotations out, meaning you start your turn with 6 AP or with 6 Chronicle Ascension, use that all up, go back to 6 Chronicle, and then turn that into Chronicle Ascension again, effectively giving you 12 AP every single turn. So this is by far the most useful, the one I would recommend for, yeah, every single deck, unless you're building for a specific purpose. So before we get to the specific purpose, let's talk about this. This really doesn't do any damage. You do not want to end your turn on Chronal Ascensions, which is the only way this works. And that is because if you do, you know, at this point we might as well actually give it a worse rating. Because if you do end your turn, you know, it's alright. If you end your turn on Chronal Ascension, you won't be able to keep them for the next turn because they disappear, effectively stopping you from preparing AP for the next turn and effectively halving the AP you can gain, because you would then have to build up the Chronicle again, and then only with Time Paradox are you able to turn it into useful AP. And then these 3 right here are simply speaking just exhaust deck, so specifically with somebody like a Luke, with somebody like a Tressa, to a lesser degree also Charon and Serenia. Those are the main units where if you want to use Rita together with those units, that is when you build this specific Chrono Archon, but also this works obviously together with Typhara as well. Now this one right here is at the moment for the most part exclusive to being used together with a Nia. You can also try using this together with, for example, somebody like a Cassius, where it's harder because the ways for him to discard cards are most of the time exhaust, temporary, so you'll lose it quite quickly. Or you could try experimenting around with somebody like a Lucas, but main beneficiary is if you want to intend to play with a Nia. And then here, when the retain effect is activated, this is either going to be for, let's say, somebody like a Beryl or somebody like an Orlea. Those will be like the ones where you would consider adding this in. But the most important part here is you are still gaining 1 Chronicle every time you activate a card based on that card's cost, right? But then again, this one is the most desirable one here. Now, for Time Axis Collapse, there is a couple really sweet ones, but let's first explain this one. So this one is almost, you could say, its entire own deck, and that is why it has this high of a rating, right? The lower the number, the higher the tier 0.5, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, you get the deal. And this would be one of those cards that you would want to copy 4 times. Then I guess the same copy version here would also apply to Time Axis Collapse, where you would try to use this as your main damage dealer, where I don't really like this card as much, and that is because this card caps at hand size, and it is also kind of hard to make sure that you have 9 additional cards that are 1 cost each or lower in your hand to get the full value. And on top of that as well, the base damage on this Time Axis Collapse is just lower than on the next one. This one right here can just in general fit into a bunch of different versions here, be it for the basic attack build, be it for the Time Axis Collapse build if you intend to turn one of them into the skill version, or be it for the Fate Imprint version. It's just a straight up 100% multiplicative for the next 3 used. If you play this card multiple times, instead of stacking the 100%, what you're stacking is the amount of cards that get the 100% bonus. Now then down here for card number 4, this card is pretty straightforward. If you have this card in hand, when you gain Chronal Ascension, which is either by playing the unique card or by transferring from one turn into the other with Chronicle, this card just auto activates, at 400% damage, too vulnerable without you having to play it. The only caveat here is you'll only ever be able to play this at max once per turn, and you have to get it in your hand when you then activate Chronal Ascension. But overall, this is a very rock solid card. And now this Time Axis Collapse, the ability to change all Fate imprints in hand to 4 cost, I don't know. There might be something out there where this turns kind of insane, but for the most part, it just kind of exists, and the only thing it really does is give you a bit of a head start on Fate imprint cost increases, because that's mainly how it works. Whereas then you might also be able to like cost manipulate them so that they interact or not interact with certain effects. But this one is definitely a lot more tricky. Now we come to like a bit more of the highlight cards, a bit more of the real copy targets to some degree, and that is right here. So most of these Future Decreed or Chrono Circle copies, they really only become super dedicated copy targets if you can manage to get like an AP or preferably a Draw Divine on them. That is what really elevates them to that next level. But you can definitely also just use them as their base version. So if you can, one draw, or one draw on any of these would be really huge. So let's just go through them in a row and talk about what makes them good. So, for example, the first one here increases the cost of one 2-cost or lower card in hand, making it either a 1-cost into a 2-cost or a 2-cost into a 3-cost, which is a bit of a, you could almost say an issue. Like, why would you want to increase the cost of a card that you then initially have to play? The main benefit here would be to take a 2-cost card and make it a 3-cost card so that you can then activate it automatically after. So this first effect with the cost increase can then play a card if a card now goes from a 2 into a 3-cost, where this one does not have the benefit of making cards more expensive, but yeah, you are changing the ability to trigger any 3-cost card into only being able to trigger 3-cost attack cards, while also not messing with cards. So by far this one is just, at least when it comes to specifically 9 synergy, the most solid, the one you would really be wanting to go for. This card, I don't really understand it. Like, look at this. Activate one random 3-cost attack card, one random 3-cost attack card. The only difference is in draw pile versus in hand, and it is a 3 AP difference between the two. I feel like that is just way too much of a burden, way too cumbersome to use. And what if you just don't have the 3-cost card you want in the draw pile? Now what, right? Like, yes, it helps you with Chronicle Generation because you can go from 0 to 6, but Chronicle Generation really isn't that hard. Now then we have our next one, which is the ability to activate 2 random 2-cost cards in hand, which would obviously require you to get 2-cost cards in hand so that you're able to activate them, where you could then get this at, this kind of doesn't really feel like a card where you want 3 to 4 copy, where you want like the full 4 copies, maybe 1/2 additional copies instead of the total grant 3. And then this one right here, Future Decree, just says that when a card whose cost is increased is used manually, meaning you play it out, you pay the cost to play the card instead of activating the card. So I don't know why there's this drawback in there. They could have just made it when a card whose cost is increased is used, 300% damage. Though there is something very interesting in this card, which might make this a lot more exciting depending on where you take this, and that is, this works for any card, right? When a card is used whose cost is increased manually, so there is this one specific, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but there's this one specific legendary card on the Order planet that raises the cost of all attack cards by 1. So all of a sudden, you would, for example, be able to use, let's say, someone like an AP Serenial to pay 1 cost instead of 0, but also get a 300% additional damage on every single one of these lasers. How valuable is this? I don't know, but in my experience, this card, it really didn't turn out to be that overwhelming. Now, on the other hand, lastly, for the chrono circuits, this one is just straight up and very solid. You pay 1, you get 3 cards, all those cards cost 2, and you can also, again here, whenever you go for like a chrono circle and future decreased synergy, it kind of feels better to go for like a 3-2 split rather than a 1-4 split, because at some point you get too many fate imprints and not enough activations, or too many activations and not enough fate imprints. Now, the reason why this is not a copy target right here is because you only keep it in your hand, and whenever you retain it, you get a fate imprint, meaning if, for example, you combine this with an Orlea, you should be able to create as many fate imprints as you need, and it would also keep your deck nice and tidy, because the moment you get it into your hand, you won't be able to draw it again, you won't have to draw it again, and you won't have to worry about really being able to create fate imprints. Now, the middle one, when Chronal Ascension is gained, move all basic cards of this unit to hand. This is the key. Like, this is what you are going for whenever you want to build a basic attack build. And that is then the ability to guarantee moving your basics of this unit to hand in during turn 1, right? You're going to be able to, or better said, before you even draw, you're going to move the basics to your hand. But then you're also going to be able to trigger the time card, the unique card, to gain Chronal Ascension a second time during the turn, allowing you to get your basics back from the graveyard into your hand, so you'll be able to play your basics a grand total of 4 times. Now, then here for this chrono circuit, this one is just, yeah, I guess thought out to be used alongside somebody like a 9, or maybe even something like a Charon, where you can select and exhaust 1 card from all cards and then create a fate imprint for each cost of that card. So for example, if you exhaust a, let's say, a futility on Charon, you're going to create 1, and if you exhaust, let's say, a hue on 9, you're going to get 3. What is also important for these chrono circuits is here again the chase would be, in terms of divines, something like AP or something like draw, where we then finally have ourselves chrono circle, the last one. When chrono circle or when chrono ascension is gained, you draw 3 2-cost attack cards, and this is the key card to where you would want to combine it with this time axis collapse, so that you're able to draw these at the beginning of your turn and then reliably play every single turn. Alright, so now time for partners. You already saw the exempt at the beginning of the video, where we talked about if you really need to pull for the partner, and that is, it's really between Eloise and Ivy. And for the most part, if you are able to sneak in 1 exhaust card or a status ailment card into a RITA deck, then you have absolutely no problem using Eloise. But Ivy is just a bit more broadly applicable and has a bit, has a more useful ego skill, where instead of applying weaken when a card is exhausted, you are able to, make the target take a 20% final damage multiplier. So Eloise, absolutely fine, but if you don't use an exhaust card, so if you, for example, were to just play time axis collapse in terms of damage, you're going to be missing out on some damage, and then there would be a bigger discrepancy between the two. So Eloise, absolutely serviceable and pretty darn good, but if you don't use the exhaust cards, then you're going to notice a bigger difference. Though, as you would expect, the dedicated partner, Ivy is at the top, just depending on the scenario, not as big of a difference. Now, the potential on her is a bit weird. It's not as easy as you would think, but just upgrading the basic attack damage is a no-brainer. Getting the unique cards up is pretty good as well. If you are really working towards a basic attack build for whatever reason, then picking up the basic proficiency can be worth it. I would just generally skip it. The crit chance and the like we'll talk about in a second, and that is because we need to talk about the unique stats. So how this works is that when Rita's attack at base. Only her plus partner and memory fragments. No gear, not doing a chaos run and the like. Only when that number is 800 or higher, you get a 10% attack bonus to her save. The important part here, this attack bonus is a lot less impressive than you would think, and that is because this attack bonus goes to the character's base damage. Like, what you're getting here is a flat attack amount added on top, so the potential here would only be around 45 additional attack. It would only be 45 additional attack rather than like some final attack damage multiplier. So that is the potential. Let's quickly get this out of the way. If you can, she is a DPS, so getting the crit chance maxed out is a rather high priority. And then obviously if you are as resource intense or interested in her, then you can also work on upgrading the crit damage potential. So now that we have that out of the way, how do you actually gear her? Now, in terms of gearing, there is 3 different ways for you to gear her, where you're going to find yourself with way number 1. Let's see. Way number 1 is going to be the 20% crit chance set, which is the Line of Justice, plus crit damage 2-piece. Then number 2 would be the new Justice set, so the Beast's Yearning set, this one right here. You would go in the 4-piece with the 2-piece of crit damage. If you don't have crit damage available, you can also use a 2-piece of attack percentage. That is viable as well. And then we have at last attack plus crit damage plus basic / agony. Those would then be, or those would be the best set. But you can also just do attack damage, crit damage, and then just 2 off-pieces that have very good substats. This is where usually for us this would end, because it would be clear you just go crit chance, justice damage, attack percent. But there is actually a bit of a debate you can go and get into here. The most optimal scenario, what you want to work towards, is being able to get a 4-piece, 2-piece with whatever 4-piece you decide on and crit damage, while also being able to hit 800 attack, so that you get the additional attack boost. Something that's also very crucial, this set only works if Fate Imprint is your main source of damage instead of the basics, or the if instead of the basics or Time Axis Collapse. If you're using Time Axis Collapse or the basics as your main damage source instead of Fate Imprint, then you should not be using the Beast Yearning. Back to the point, and that is, if you can, you want to reach 800 in a set like this with a crit chance, justice damage, attack split. If that is not possible, you have 2 ways you can kind of change things up. That is either going with an attack set 2-piece, which I really wouldn't recommend, because even though you get a bit of attack, losing 25% crit damage hurts you way more when it comes to the actual damage you end up dealing. Or you can use an attack percentage goblet. So this attack percentage goblet here, for example, could be used to make sure you get over that 800 limit. So for example, if we were to change it in, you see we're now at 924, and that is because we added the additional around 45 attack gained from the potential straight onto the attack as a flat value, right? So that's where this like bigger jump comes from, and then the remaining 100 attack comes from around the 25% bonus, which is 25% of around 450, which then ends up being around 100. So this is possible, but you know what's interesting? This actually ends up being the same thing. Like the damage output of this setup at 924 with no justice damage, or this one where we instead are going to go back to justice damage at only 779 attack, it's basically the same thing. It ends up being the same thing, and what I'm a bit scared of, but it's a bit hard to prove, is that potentially the more multipliers you introduce and the higher in damage percentage you go, that attack is kind of going to fall off, and justice damage itself, being that additional multiplier, is going to win out. So if you want to stay on the safe side, you still go with crit chance, justice damage, and attack. Now, if for whatever reason you decide you want to be a little bit funny, then you pick attack here, and you also pick attack here, and then all of a sudden we are at 1047, and you can really reach some very impressive attack numbers. And the only way this is viable is through the 20% crit chance for 2 cost or more, bringing you to 58%. But honestly, I don't really think that's worth it. And due to her really being able to use the Line of Justice set, she can actually get a really impressive stat line. And that is, let me give you an example. If we get this right here, we are actually looking at 779 attack, 57.4 crit chance plus an additional 20 from the set effect, because all her cards are 2 cost or higher. So 77.4 crit chance on then 186.7 crit damage. So yeah, Line of Justice, the 20% crit chance is honestly really bonkers. Alright, now who do you pair Rita up with for some great effect? 9 is just a pretty obvious choice. Just keep in mind, it might be feeling a bit awkward, especially doing a Chaos run, when you try to play out Chrono Archon while also using Hue, because Hue will basically take all your AP that you have available for the turn. But if you're able to break with Hue, you'll then be able to play Chrono Archon earlier. It is just very important that you make sure you get Chrono Archon out if you think a fight is going to go longer than, let's say, 2 or 3 turns, and you actually need the Chronicle benefit on Rita. That's the only thing you really need to keep in mind for 9. But then just the ability to play out a bunch of Hues, to exhaust the Hues, 9 herself just being really good for the Chaos, and also being of the right element, in this case Order, on the Order planet, really helps her as a Justice unit just find her footing a bit better. Typhara is also again another no-brainer that you can absolutely easily run with her. What you just have to keep in mind is that Typhara is very card reliant when it comes to you being able to generate any HP back. You get a tiny heal from the barrier deployment, tiny heal from either archetype square or archetype circle, and your biggest heal or survivability tool would really be creation and destruction. Now, on that note, it's very important. It's very important for you to actually get something like this right here when it comes to survivability. Gain 1 evasion when you activate both damage, healing, and shield with cards, or even something like this, where if a turn is ended while 1 or more AP is remaining at the start of the next turn, draw 1, gain 1 AP. So this one can be incredibly big in terms of like overall run survivability, and should not be underestimated. So if you have the ability to unlock it, this is also going to help Typhara as a healer, but also Rita and every other character in the game in a pretty major way. So those are obviously the season-based characters, but then other popular characters you can pair her up with are just Rita plus Serenial, and then a controller goes really well due to exhaust synergy. Also the fact that most of her cards cost you nothing, so you can spend AP on Rita instead of actually having to spend it on Serenial. And then in general, when, let's see, can we actually sort here? In general, it really goes Rita plus any controller, where Typhara works really well, Naja works really well, Orlea can also be incredibly good for you to play alongside of a Rita, because Orlea can also be played very AP unintensive and has some really strong heals, like her healing multipliers on Will of Light, or even if, for example, you find yourself in a situation where you just get sturdies to heal yourself, or just healing through growth acceleration. The healing here, if you run Rita together with Naja, make sure you have another unit with you that attacks a lot. So for example, somebody like a Serenia, because otherwise you won't really be able to use the Veracity, so that you can then also use mealtime to heal yourself up big time. Cassius, Nia, Ray, and Mika, all of them are pretty much well to be paired off and up with a Rita. And then for that last slot, you can either find yourself another DPS, right? Like for example, a 9, this Serenia we named. Or you can go with card draw related units like a Beryl. You could go with something like a Veronica. A Lucas would work as well. So these could all be card related units you can just chuck in. You can also try your hand at playing somebody like a Charon, who can end up being quite a good addition. And then in general, she really isn't much of a support. She really is a bit more of a DPS. So, oh yeah, Khalib. Khalib is a no-brainer. If you run Rita, a healer, and Khalib, you're going to be pretty much set for life, because you have multiple ways of playing out these expensive cards on Khalib, not only through Celestial, but also with them costing 2, or like for example the Great Sword Aquila and Overpower costing 2 respectively. You have a lot of options in being able to cast these cards, or even just use the Rita AP for Rita cards, and then just use your standard AP to play out your Khalib cards to help you with tankiness, survivability, and overall ease of use. So this should be it mostly for the team section. Alright, now dupe wise, the E1. How important is the E1? The E1, once again, it's a good improvement. It's a nice upgrade to the time paradox, but it is also bound to the fact that you need to use it whenever you actually have 6 chronicles, so that you can then gain 8 chronal ascension. Some of the things that can happen is, depending on what kind of build you're running, depending on how you have a build, you might not even be able to use, you might not even be able to get any value out of the 2 additional AP. So it's great, but it is nothing you should chase. If you can get it on the side, that is just as well. Now this one right here, when Chrono Ascension is gained, which is either at the start of the turn or if you play her purple card, you gain a buff called Fate Distortion, where you increase the damage amount of the next card of this unit by 30, and you also increase the damage amount by an additional 10% for each cost of that card. So this specifically is a bigger buff to the Fate Imprints, because the Fate Imprints themselves level each other up to like 2 cost, 3 cost, 4 cost, 5 cost, 6 cost, 7 cost, and so on and so forth, where this one would really come in clutch. But by no means does this really scream you need to get it, but if you can, if you already have it on E1, might as well take that E2 step. This is really where you only want to go if you want to go further than the E3, and that is because this damage increase here for the ult, you will only ever be able to use it 1 time per fight, and getting a 300% increase instead of a 200, so long as it's not about super mega nuking for like just some clip potential, this really isn't that important. But at least out of all the E3s available, it's one of the better ones in the game. This one here is just, once again, you are in the territory of already being heavily invested, and you're getting rewarded by a 5% increase for 1 turn to her attack cards every time you use a 2-cost card. So this heavily revolves around you playing a lot of 2-cost cards, which is very much within her capabilities. Here we're just getting a multiplier upgrade, which, similar to 9 and Typhara, is more effective on her than on other units due to her base multipliers being so high. So them getting multiplied by an additional 1.26 instead of a 1.2 multiplier really ends up paying off a bit more. And now for the final one, and that is whenever you move into Chronal Ascension, you gain 6 additional Chronal Ascension for the first time during a battle. So ignorable for the most part, because it only really helps you during 1 singular turn. But whenever Chronal Ascension is removed, meaning you spend AP to use this Chronal Ascension, or you obviously play Rita cards for free, you inflict 80% fixed damage per Chronal Ascension used over 1 turn. So this is really, again, one of those E6s that unlocks a super main DPS potential, but by no means anything that's even remotely close to necessary. Alright, so now that we have once again this through, let's talk a bit about gear. Let's talk about kind of the things you're looking for and what can benefit you, while also maybe giving you a bit of examples of cards that would be worth chasing. So for example, Future Decreed can be the core of you building an entire build surrounding a 9, where you have 4 of these, which is pretty much, this one is kind of like Fighting Spirit, but just better. It costs you nothing and it can get a divine, whereas Fighting Spirit is always 1 cost and then triggering it, where obviously I guess there is a difference if you're talking in terms of being able to target it, so long as you have like an E1 on 9. You'll also notice I have a bunch of these Chrono Archons with the 3 Chronicle versions, and this Time Collapse here, it's just a card that stays in your hand, plays itself for free. It's just a very solid pickup. And here we have again another interaction with 9 to create some Fate imprints, and also just some standard Chrono Circle Fate imprints. Now this Leaf of the World Tree is something you should really consider, and that is when 3 cards of 2 cost or higher are used, you gain Stockpile. This stockpile is not limited to the amount of turns, and it also isn't limited how much of this stockpile you can gain in 1 turn. So if for example you play 6 2-cost cards, you gain 2 AP carry over for the next 2 turns as well. So out of all the rings, this one just feels the most impactful. How much can you really do with a stockpile? It's a bit hard to say, but it can help you, for example, build up AP if you're looking to like play a really expensive card at a certain point in time. And then now let's talk a bit about arena gears. So increasing the damage amount of attack cards flat out for 20% is one of those things you should be looking out for. The 2 cost or higher increase is also pretty substantial. But then if you play the Fate imprint variant, also the exhaust damage increase variant could be something to look forward to. Other notable ones would be if you pay 3 AP for a card, you gain 1 AP back 1 time per turn, ends up working quite well for her. And also something along the lines of the additional crit chance against vulnerable targets, the potential to also apply vulnerable to targets if you end your turn on AP. Those are like the most notable arena perks. Whereas in terms of gear, when it comes to boss drops, Mask of Flames is probably the one that you really want to get, and that is because you're getting a damage increasing chest piece where you can then get up to 35% damage to vulnerable targets. So for example, Time Axis Collapse can allow you to get vulnerable, so you can trigger this effect. Or Millennium Arbor as a weapon, whenever you play a 3 cost or higher card, 1 vulnerable to a random enemy, can also allow you to get this effect, or obviously just vulnerable gain from maybe somebody in your team obviously works out as well. Now that is in terms of the unique items. There is, hypothetically speaking, 2 more. You could for example do the quest line where you pick up one of these items right here. For example, I don't think that, does the summoned lamp count? I'm not too sure, but there's for example the sword, the bell and the harp. When you take those, you can get an item that allows you to reduce the cost by 1 of exhaust cards, which would at least work for Fate imprints, especially because you also have them in hand. But it's a bit counterintuitive to how Fate imprints work, with them kind of desiring to become more and more expensive so that their base damage becomes higher and higher. And then obviously there's 2 weapons that you really would desire, and that is either the weaker version, which is the 8% team-wide attack buff, or the Cthulhu support weapon. So the way you encounter Cthulhu is just by fighting red fights. That one would be quite good because you are interacting a lot with the attack stat, so getting an attack multiplier is quite great. But then the chase would be the Cthulhu gun, the Cthulhu pistol, giving you a grand total of 18% attack multiplicative, and that is also final attack value. And if I had a gun like that, I might actually consider running an attack percentage desire, and potentially even an attack percentage anomaly. So that's it in terms of the gear slots really. There's some other useful ones that you can find, like for example Vine Camouflage, just in terms of survivability, once again with similar arena perks. If you are the type of guy to like build up and you don't have a problem with not doing damage every single turn, but only like every second turn, Veiled Thorn can be quite nice, but she doesn't really have anything where you'd like mega want to scale into. And obviously, if you can get something like a Fairy King's Crown for 6% crit chance, or something like the dagger that tricked the shadow as a weapon that gives you crit damage, those work out as well. Other notables would then again be something like a Lump of Light, where the third attack card created, so the third Fate imprint created, would be 30% stronger, or something along the lines of a Rage Potion, where every fourth used attack card would be stronger as well. So this should be it, I think, for the most part, at least as of this moment. I will again obviously continue over the next few days to try and search out builds, try to search out good combos. You can again look forward to something like an E0 showcase. And yeah, I think as always we see each other in the next one. Peace!